Violence against minorities, a ban on cow slaughter. Is Hindu nationalism on the rise in India? Hello, I'm Nathan King, sitting in for Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Hello again. The world's largest democracy is being accused of abandoning its secular history after the Hindu nationalist BJP party won India's parliamentary elections in 2014. Many Indian states are now actively enforcing bans on the slaughter of cows, an animal considered holy by India's majority Hindu population. Hindu vigilantes are often seen searching trucks that might be transporting the animals, and at least 3 Muslims were killed suspected of eating beef or smuggling cows. In September, a journalist and an outspoken critic of the government was shot dead, reinforcing criticism that the BJP is trying to muzzle the media. For their part, supporters of Prime Minister Narendra Modi accuse mainstream news outlets of spreading lies and misinformation about the ruling coalition. They also claim that Modi has launched a war against corruption, championed economic development, and introduced measures to streamline India's sales tax codes. Much to discuss. Let's meet our panel here in the studio. Irfan Nooruddin, he's a professor of Indian politics at Georgetown University. From New Delhi, we have Subramanian Swamy. He's a member of the upper house of the Indian Parliament. Also with us here is Sadanand Dhume, a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks so much for joining us. Sadanand, first of all, we talked about sort of the cows thing there, but also requirements to stand with the national anthems being played in public areas. All these little things, do they add up to a sort of Hindu nationalism we haven't seen since post-independence?
I mean, I think you have to sort of analytically separate Indian nationalism and Hindu nationalism. Mm-hmm. Whatever you make of the Supreme Court's order to have people stand up for the national anthem in movie theaters, that comes from the courts, not from the government, and it's not Hindu nationalism, it's Indian nationalism. Hindu nationalism is much more related to things like the toughened penalties on cow slaughter, the ridiculous cattle slaughter rules they've put in place, which effectively target the livelihoods of some of India's poorest people.
You call it ridiculous, why?
Because it makes no sense economically. They are hurting a thriving industry. Secondly, it targets some of the poorest and neediest people and you're taking away their livelihoods. And third, it's entirely unnecessary because most Indian states, in any case, had banned the slaughter of the cow, which Hindus consider holy. So it's also a case of overkill.
Subramanian Swamy in New Delhi, can you pick up on that point about the cow slaughter? I remember reading that the leather industry in India has been hit particularly hard by this. What's behind it, and what's your view?
Well, Article 48 of the Constitution requires India to ban the slaughter of cows. And it's a constitutional requirement, and yes, it will affect the leather industry, but that's a sacrifice we have to make because of meeting the Article 48 requirements. And Article 48 was actually inserted on the insistence of Mahatma Gandhi, who in fact said that if he had power for one day, the first thing he would do is ban the slaughter of cows. Not all cows, but certainly Bos indicus breed of the cow.
Irfan, India is a majority Hindu country, I think 78–79% of the population. Is this just the majority expressing its will, or is this a sort of tyranny of the majority?
I think it's the tyranny of a minority of the majority. Lots of Hindus eat beef. Lower caste Hindus have eaten beef for millennia. So the notion that, in fact, this is a representation of the majority will is something we should push back on as well. There's a very particular part of the right wing, the Hindu right wing, that has made beef slaughter a major part of its plank. Interestingly, in spite of what Dr. Swamy just said, the national government has not tried to ban cow slaughter from the center. They've relied on the states.
Narendra Modi has spoken out against it.
Indeed. Yeah. He's in fact suggested in a subtle manner, not as stridently as some of us would like him to, that this is a distraction from the larger work that the government is trying to do. In states that the BJP is trying to compete in, like Kerala, like in the Northeast.
Kerala in the Deep South.
In the Deep South, and then other states in the Northeast. They have explicitly, in fact, said that they're not going to ban cow slaughter. BJP leaders in those states have made clear that they are not in support of it. So the notion that this is somehow just appeasing or even honoring the will of a majority of the Indian population, the 80% or so that are Hindu, is, I think, itself falling prey to the exact line that they wish to push. That is not, in fact, the case.
Sadanand, let's get away from beef, but talk about the overall sort of picture of the Modi government. He's very popular, it seems, and he also seems to be, or at least project himself as a man of the people, away from the sort of cosmopolitan elites. You know, you see where I'm going with this? We have a similar feeling here in Washington, D.C., elsewhere. Is that what resonates?
Yes, I mean, he's an extremely popular leader. There's no question about it. All the opinion polls that I've seen suggest that his approval rating are well above 70%. Some suggest it's around 80%, which is quite, astounding for someone who's been in power for more than 3 years. It's also true that his party has been winning many elections. So there's no question that Modi does represent, he's a popular leader, and he does represent a kind of grassroots upsurge. And I would, in fact, argue that many people would agree with him on issues if you frame them in an emotive way, such as cow slaughter. But bringing it back to that, the point is not. There is no great debate in India. It's not as though the people of Uttar Pradesh are all sort of queuing up and saying you've got to allow cow slaughter. So that's why I think Dr. Swamy's point is misleading. The point that people are upset about is two things. One, these regulations being widened to the point where they were, from where they were, to include buffaloes that target directly people's livelihoods.
Because buffaloes aren't just used for meat.
Exactly, and they're not sacred. And secondly, the rise of these vigilante gangs that seem to feel empowered to take the law into their own hands and attack people simply on the basis of accusations. Those are the two new things. And of course, some tightening of the laws. This is not a broad debate about cow slaughter as I see it.
Dr. Swamy, we'd like to respond because, anyone who's travelled on the Indian railway system knows that there's a lot of respect for cows because the trains stop when there's one on the track, same in traffic. Is the BJP government taking the sort of Hindu nationalism too far to energise its base and build an electoral majority that is unassailable from the opposition Congress?
Well, I don't think there is anything called Hindu nationalism. The Hindus are 80% of the population. And certainly they share the view that India should be more united. We want to get rid of the caste distinctions, the regional and linguistic differences. These are all positive things for the country's unity. And therefore, to say it's Hindu nationalism is that is India is for Hindus, that way we have never said. We are bound by the Constitution, and the Constitution is secular. And there are no steps that we have taken that would deprive the minorities of their rights under the Constitution.
Irfan, would you like to respond? And I'd also like to add in another thing. Dr. Swamy brought up we want to get rid of the caste system. One of the really popular things that Prime Minister Modi has done was sort of demonetize the two top banknotes in India. Even though lots of economists said this was ridiculous and stuff, it was very popular because it stopped the rich people hiding their money. That was the idea. That was popular. And does that help sort of get rid of the sort of caste distinctions that have been quite rigid from time to time in post-colonial India?
I think Mr. Modi and the large parts of the BJP have said the right things, disavowing the worst offenses of the caste system. But the notion that the caste system is going anywhere, even in modern India, is misleading. The caste system is a lived experience. It is the experience of lower caste Hindus who are beaten up because they had the audacity of observing upper caste Hindus celebrating a particular ritual. It is the audacity of lower caste Hindus who might proposition or romance an upper caste woman and get beat up or lynched.
You're saying that still happens?
It happens regularly. In fact, For all the talk that we often have about anti-Muslim violence in India, anti-lower caste violence is far more endemic across the country.
So Modi's trying to do something about this.
Modi has said the right things at the top, but the BJP as a party has a fundamental challenge, which is that a large part of its core base comes from the upper castes of Hindu society. Those folks are going to have to be dragged into the modern age to understand that these are age-old distinctions that should not matter in modern India. That, on the other hand, I think the party is recognizing that Dalits and the lower castes are a major part of the vote constituency that they have to appeal to. The nomination of a lower caste Hindu by the BJP to be the president of the country was a major step in that regard. On demonetization, the success of demonetization is purely a political success. I would argue, and I think the data now suggests that this is valid, that it has had only negative economic impacts in terms of the slowdown of the economy right at a time when the economy should have been being stimulated. It was in fact slowed down. That a lot of the claims about how much black money was out there were not in fact borne out by the return of the currency to the banks. But what Modi was able to do was tap into that popular sentiment and frame this as a referendum on corruption, on a referendum on upper-class elites who had been getting away with bilking the system. And I think the fact that he got away with that suggests that that anti-elite sentiment is a very real force in Indian politics. And he, among others, as Sadanand pointed out, has the personal gravitas, the personal charisma to be able to tap that in ways that maybe he'll do it for good, but could potentially be quite frightening in a certain way.
Well, anti-corruption is very popular. I just came back from China, and that was sort of the number one thing that everyone told me during the Communist Party Congress that they liked going forward. Sadanand, the demonetization thing, it was interesting because, as you just said, it came at a time of rapid economic growth in India. India's still expanding at quite a clip. They're sort of neck and neck with China at the moment in terms of fast economic growth. Modi's delivering, right, on his economic promises?
I think demonetization is one of the stupidest things that any Indian government has done in the last 25 years.
Tell us how you really feel.
Perhaps longer. So I really don't think that that's the best example to
Explain
use
why.
Of a government delivering.
Because it was very popular.
It was popular. A lot of stupid economic decisions in Indian history have been popular. The nationalization of the banks was popular, making it impossible for companies to fire workers. The most sort of complicated labor laws in the world were popular. Many things in Indian history have been economically destructive but popular. Hugo Chavez was popular. So I don't think you should judge the economic success by its electoral popularity. So that's sort of number one. So on demonetization. That said, yes, the government has done some good things. I'd say they've been very successful at attracting FDI, for instance.
Foreign direct investment, yeah.
The GST that they've put in place is quite flawed, as Dr. Swamy has pointed out in great detail. He's a leading economist. But at least it seems to be a step in the right direction.
That's the economic plan,
That's the simplification of taxes.
Yeah.
So certainly they have done some things. I just wouldn't say that demonetization is on that list.
Dr. Swamy, demonetization was very popular. At least one of the panel here says it was the most stupid idea ever. Are you going to defend it? And also, what about Modi's economic record? I mean, India is expanding at quite a clip.
Well, the demonetization would have been a very successful step had the finance ministry done the backup work, such as printing the lower domination notes in sufficient numbers, and had the nerve to tell the Prime Minister that they weren't ready for it because they hadn't done it. They had not published the 500 rupee note and the 1,000 rupee note were demonetized. And they should have had enough 100 rupee notes and perhaps issued a new 200 rupee notes in sufficient amount so that people were not strapped for cash. And the banks didn't have this horrible situation of long queues. That's where it failed. And I think it's not a popular step, but it was people gave the benefit of doubt to the Prime Minister saying that he's trying to do something. In this regard, let me say that this constant attack on the BJP as a party of upper classes or upper castes, the Prime Minister comes from the backward castes. And I would say if you look at the members of parliament that we have, 2/3 belong to the backward castes. So I don't know where this impression is gaining ground that somehow the upper castes like the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas are dominating the BJP.